Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, opinion writer and columnist, and I'm joined by
Nancy Pryor-Johnson, deputy editorial board editor and columnist.
And on January 5th, Bexar County and the city of San Antonio unveiled a collaborative public safety action plan, which had been a few months in the making. And was really a response to concerns about violent crime. And specifically, we had some shootings of police officers last year. And our guest today had played a major role in both the design and will play a major role in the implementation of this public safety action plan. Judge Ron Rangel is the judge of the 379th District Court, and he's the administrative judge for Bexar County's criminal court system. He's also the host of the Beyond the Gavel podcast. Judge Rangel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Gilbert.
I was looking at the letter that you sent to County Judge Peter Sakai on October 26th, which had a lot of suggestions. You clearly, talked to a lot of stakeholders, and we had kind of worked to develop kind of a blueprint for going forward. And so I see a lot of what I see in this public safety action plan was in that letter that you wrote to him. Is that really where the process began, or where did the public safety action plan process? What initiated it?
A lot of the things within the public safety action plan were actually things that we had been talking about within the county system. Mm-hmm. The issue is, how do you bring that forward? How do you make that a priority with the stakeholders that have the funding obligations for some of those things? We had already applied for grants within the state. I applied for a grant it's called the Technical Training and Assistance Program through TIDC, which gave us $1 million to actually study the system. Mm-hmm. We've gotten a lot of grants within the last couple of years that we've applied for and have actually obtained. So some of these things are already in the works. However, because of the pressing issue, I know the media was really concerned about the issues going on with police officer involved shootings. Nancy, I know your husband is a police officer.
He's retired, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And I know how difficult that is, and thank you for your service, and thank him. When I was in college, I had a friend that I'd go to her home, and her father and her brother were police officers. Mm-hmm. And I just remember her being glued by that police radio all night long. I really, really felt for her. So I recognize the value of that. And so these issues brought forth within the system that urgency to start talking about these things and start talking about how are we going to implement these things. Mm-hmm. So I saw it as an opportunity to say, hey, let's go ahead and start dealing with these things that we within the system can see as being problems. Mm-hmm. The big thing, obviously, is the communication between the city and the county.
One of the things that struck me about the letter was you talked about, because there's been so much discussion about bail, the bail amounts that magistrate judges set, and a lot of discussion. And some of it, I don't know how much of it is based in reality or actual data. The idea that we have repeat violent offenders who are out in the streets and have maybe low bail set for them. You kind of push back against the idea that we have a bail problem, and if I understood right in the letter, you're basically saying that the bail amounts that are being set in Bexar County are pretty much in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. I mean, is that fair to say?
The first meeting we had with the city, and I'm talking about the county and the city, the narrative was repeat violent offenders out on bail committing these offenses. Right. And I didn't need to correct them. I did say, that's not really the situation here, because out of these 6 officer involved shootings, 2 of them had a prior history that you could call a violent history. One guy had a misdemeanor assault. Mm-hmm. And so that actually is not a felony offense. Yeah. So only one truly had a prior felony offense that we could call repeat violent offenders. So I'm not sure how that terminology came into play. And obviously once that entered the lexicon, everybody started to use it. But I think when the police chief first started talking about this issue, in my view, I can't put words in his mouth, but in my view, he was more focused on the fact that these individuals were out in society, not necessarily out because of bail. Later, that conversation pivoted into a bail issue. So I did the research. Turned out that in the last 5 to 7 years, our magistrates in Bexar County have been setting these bail amounts at the exact amounts that they had been set at previously. And so when you look at homicide cases, murder cases, manslaughter cases, those bail amounts had actually gone up within the last few years, almost twice as high as what they were before. The way bail works, before a few years ago, we did a series of reforms here in Bexar County. We used to have something called bail schedules, right? Where somebody's arrested for a certain type of offense, let's say a third-degree felony, they'd get a certain bail amount that was the standard, and that's where the magistrates would start. They'd start at like maybe $10,000. Second-degree felony would go up to $20,000. Aggravated felonies would be $75,000. And magistrates really didn't vary much from that. The law says is that judges are not allowed to ever influence other judges on how to rule on specific cases. Mm-hmm. So as a result of that, the magistrates don't take any influence from us. They basically review whatever documentation is in front of them. They take evidence from each side and making these determinations, and then they go from there. So when we remove these schedules that existed for bail, they really didn't vary much from them. If anything, they went up.
We tend to hear people say, particularly when there is an arrest made for a violent offense, people will say, "Well, there should be no bail at all. Why is this person getting an opportunity to receive bail?" And if you could talk a little bit about, how much leeway magistrate judges have when it comes to setting bail, because I mean, there are restrictions that are placed on them when it comes to handling these kinds of things.
So the first thing is every single person arrested at the initial arrest, when they go to a magistrate, they have a right to bail. So they have a right to get out if they secure a bond. And bail and bond sometimes are used interchangeably. Sure. They really kind of mean different things, but they go before the magistrate. The magistrate has to review certain issues, things like, what is the safety to the community? What is the safety to the defendant? Is there a victim that is involved? How violent was this crime? And one of the things that Houston, Harris County got sued for is they have to consider what the family could afford in getting this person out on bail. In other words, if it's an impoverished family, let's say the family makes $10,000 a year, a bail setting for a nonviolent crime at $1 million is unreasonable, right? That person will never come out of jail while their case is pending. The purpose of bail by our Constitution is to ensure somebody's presence at court and at all the court hearings. So the magistrate is considering these kinds of issues. Before April of 2022, the magistrates really didn't have a statewide or a nationwide view of what somebody's criminal history looked like. Whatever was brought to them is what they had before them. That's starting to change now with some implementation of something we called Senate Bill 6, which came out through the governor's office and then subsequently passed in the legislature.
So, I mean, one thing that has, in conversations we've had with the district attorney, police chief, and so on, I guess there's been a question about how the level of communication that happens between law enforcement and the magistrate judge, make sure the magistrate judge is completely aware of everything. And I guess there is information that is available to the magistrate judge that they can access when someone is brought in. But is that when you look, because I know that magistration is going to be an area that you're really going to be focusing on as this is implemented. Is that an area that you think can be improved, just to have that communication so that the magistrate judge knows everything there is to know? Absolutely.
There's a couple of points that go along with that, right? So the first point is police officers don't go directly. And when I say police officers, we're focusing solely on San Antonio Police Department, right? There are 23 municipalities within our county. The other municipalities go directly to our intake assessment over at the Bexar County, right? Over where the jail's at. SAPD takes their individuals first to processing through the detention center on Frio Street. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes that delay where individuals go to that processing center prior to going to the Bexar County Center causes us to lose a lot of that communication with police officers. So if certain police officers with certain violent type offenses go directly to the South Tower, which is what we call the county facility, then they would be available for these magistrates to communicate with. Now, you asked a question about bail and how that works. At the onset, I indicated that everybody has a right to bail. However, there are some provisions in the law, they're constitutional, where under certain circumstances, and they're kind of difficult to identify and difficult to find, within 7 days, if there is a certain crime that fits a certain criteria, and the state can prove that in a hearing before a judge, and it's got to be the district court judge, within a judge that this crime was committed and there's a burden of proof that's been met, not as high as proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a jury trial standard, but a little less than that, but still subsequently up there. If they can prove that, then that bail can be removed. So then the person would not have an opportunity to get out of jail. The issue with that is that trial, that disposition must take place within 60 days. And currently indicting a case within 60 days is a very difficult proposition in our system. I think when the Constitution was created and those provisions were put in place, didn't really think too much about big urban areas like Bexar County and developing that type of process. So that type of process is what I'm working on within the plan. It's going to take a little bit of time to develop it because there's a lot of different people involved. What folks don't always understand is just with magistration, you have so many different agencies that are involved, so many different public officials. You think of the district attorney's office, the county judge and each of the commissioners, each of the judges, district clerk, county clerk, the sheriff, a lot of folks that they put in place like pretrial services. And I could go on and on. There's just a lot of different parts of the system that are almost a bureaucracy in and of themselves. Then coming together, it makes it difficult to put all that together to make these kind of plans work.
We've talked before about the role of the magistrate judges, and I remember you sharing some information that was a little different than what I expected or what I imagined. Can you just kind of walk us through the role of a magistrate judge? Like, what are their days like? What are they juggling? And what exact communication are they getting in their hands? Is it on a computer screen? Is it on paper? I mean, how does it work in Bexar County?
Well, it's an interesting topic. And I think one of the things that we had talked about is the system that we use in Bexar County that is used throughout all the different agencies is a 1972 DAWS program, which is one of the things which we identified in the plan. Yeah. And so this DAWS program, the county has taken a long time to sort of try to change. It's a green screen where you got to put in a code to get different information. Frankly, I cannot even use it. So anytime I want information from the system, I got to lean over to a clerk or to my coordinator and ask her to look something up for me. Codes change every day, that type of thing. And so we're in the middle of implementing sort of like the Windows version of the computer justice system. So these magistrates currently, because we don't have that implemented yet, that was supposed to come in 2 years ago. There's been a delay in bringing that in. It's a very arduous, difficult process. So the magistrates simply are sitting there, right? They come in. We have 3 full-timers. We have about 11 to 12 part-timers. We've lost 1 or 2. We haven't re-upped those positions yet, but they basically sit there. They wait for folks to come in. Now, the way it works over at the county facility, because the city brings in people by the busloads, right? The city of San Antonio takes their folks over to their processing. They would wait between having 12 to 20 plus people before they would bring them over to save money. So bringing them over then would give these magistrates a very limited amount of time to see each person. Sometimes the public defender, which we have there at the location, did not have an ability to interview these folks with enough time. Sometimes pretrial services didn't have a chance to interview these individuals that were arrested. There is a mental health assessment that takes place. Sometimes we couldn't do that. So these folks are shepherded through very, very quickly. Because the public defender didn't have a lot of time to review these files, the DA was in the same situation. So think of it as a cattle call. Think of it as the magistrate is sitting there. They're waiting for folks to come in. They trickle in, and then you get a busload of 20 people, and then you got to pump it out, right? And sometimes these things happen at the end of a shift, at the beginning of a shift, and so it bleeds over into trying to figure out how to handle certain issues. Part of this new system that we're talking about is incorporating called a plan that the state put in called the Public Safety Plan. And there's a reporting system that they are now requiring all magistrates. That reporting system then allows all magistrates before they set bail to go in and have an opportunity to review somebody's entire criminal history. The issue with that is it's so new, some of the smaller counties have not been putting in effectively the information that's accurate. And as a result of that, we're not always getting accurate information. So that's starting to take shape. It's starting to improve. You can see the state is doing the same thing that Bexar County is in terms of trying to make sure that we keep our public safe.
And I just know, like, especially in domestic violence cases, there's just so many cases. I mean, when you just go online and just try to research, and there's case after case after case, and they just they start stacking up on top of each other. And I would think, and that's just me trying to write stories over here and research. And I'm just thinking of these magistrate judges just sitting there and trying to go through it so quickly. I mean, how many minutes or how much time do they have on average per case?
They don't have much time. Sometimes they just have a minute or 2.
Wow.
And it is difficult. Now, you got to remember this as well, is that the role of the police officer is to keep us safe. right?
Yeah.
So when they arrive at a scene, if there's a scuffle going on, if there's a lot of times the idea is there's a lot of calls, police officers also, they have to get to a lot of different places.
Yeah.
And so they have to make an arrest, remove individuals from that particular system and bring them over into the justice system. Once they're in the system, then now we're dealing with them from the legal standpoint. Mm-hmm. So they may throw a lot of different types of charges on an individual because they don't know what's going to stick. They're just trying to make sure that folks are safe.
Yeah.
And by and large, obviously, police officers have done a great job in keeping us safe. But then when it gets over to the intake section, then it's time to make sure that the law can be followed and certain processes can be applied. And sometimes that's a very different standard.
And then they have their rights too. I mean, I'm also thinking about it. That other side of things is that you can't keep anybody. I mean, you have to really follow the law and the Constitution.
That's right.
Which it seems very difficult. I didn't realize it was just minutes. That's terrible.
Judge, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about outstanding warrants. You know, we so much focus is given to bail amounts, and we had a recent case involving a killing spree that took place in San Antonio and Austin. The defendant Shane James Jr. Allegedly murdered 6 people, and there were, I think, 3 others injured. And you know, there was a lot of attention given to the fact that he had been he'd been out on bail, and Texas Organizing Project had helped him pay for the bail. But his previous offenses had been misdemeanor assaults, and I mean, my understanding is that even if he had not been bailed out, he would have been out. He would have been free because those incidents happened, or the previous incident happened in early 2022. And these recent murders happened at the end of 2023. But beyond that, I thought it was interesting that after he was released on bail, I think the day after that, he cut off his ankle monitor, and there's an outstanding warrant for his arrest. I think there was even an incident at some point where his family called, and law enforcement was there, and they made the decision to not to take him in. And so I just think that maybe that issue of the fact that there are people out there with outstanding warrants not getting picked up, I think that maybe sometimes gets overlooked because the bail issue is one that people just tend that tends to be the one that they see as the issue.
Well, to give you an idea as to how complicating the issue is, the bail that was set was not a magistrate that was put in place by Bexar County judges. There are different types of magistrates. That particular bond was set by a judge that was employed by the state through the regional administrative judge appointed as a visiting judge. And so sometimes the county contracts with the state to bring in visiting judges to help with certain issues. In this particular situation, this visiting judge has been brought in to help with helping the jail clear. And so those kind of bonds, when people say, hey, the magistrate set those are not our magistrates. And it's not that it's necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Right. It just shows you how complicating the system is. There are actually 3 different types of folks that magistrate individuals in Bexar County. Now, one recently stopped magistrating. So there's 3 people that see people that get arrested. You get the city magistrates, get the county magistrates, and then you get a visiting judge that is appointed through the state. And so understanding that, there are a lot of other issues that come in play when somebody is out on bail. And as you're talking about, Gilbert, let's say somebody does have a monitor. They cut that monitor off. What happens? Now, there are 2 types of supervision that happen in Bexar County when people get arrested. The first is through pretrial services. So if somebody gets arrested and they're out on bail, then they go through what we call pretrial services. The county calls it judicial services. They have an organization called Sentinel, which monitors individuals 24/7. So if there's an individual that cuts a monitor that's supposed to have one, an individual that violates a zone that they're not supposed to go to, let's say that they're supposed to stay away from an alleged victim of a crime, then they immediately contact our magistrate over through Bexar County and a warrant is issued. With probation, and there are violent people that get on probation. And the question is, how does that happen? Let's say that you're a DA's office and you're prosecuting a case and you interview folks that are, a witness, an eyewitness, a victim, and you walk away from that thinking That was not a good interview. I do not think this person would do well in court. I don't feel comfortable bringing this case to trial because I don't think that they'll be believable for whatever reason. Or let's say witness problems. Witnesses don't show up. Let's say there's evidence problems or things that judges don't know anything about the case, but the parties understand the strengths and weaknesses. So let's say that there's a situation where the DA believes there's no way we can prove this case in court. And I've seen those situations. And as a result of that, we're going to place this person on community supervision to keep an eye on them and make sure they go through the arduous process of reporting and everything else. So a person like that can get on bond. They get released. They get probation. Now that they're on probation, part of their probation is to have a monitor. If they cut that monitor or if they otherwise violate some safety zone, what happens then is that agency works 24/7. They would send some communication over to probation, and the first opportunity that probation would have an opportunity to know that that thing was sent would be the first business day.
I see.
So this past weekend was MLK Day, right? It was the weekend before, it was a great opportunity for us to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. But if something were to happen Friday at 10 p.m. and they send something in, probation won't know about it till 8 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. So that's problematic. So then you have people that are out there in violation of this thing and there's no warrant for their arrest. Also, officers, like on the Shane James situation, officers have policies where they do not go into a home on misdemeanor violations. And so something like that, you could have somebody who's a violent individual, but they're on a misdemeanor type charge. They don't want to break into a home.
So they would have needed him to come out, or they would need to wait until the situation allowed him to.
Correct. And if they go into a home by force, then you could see the results of that through other cases. Sure. And that's another dangerous situation.
Yeah. We heard so much about the effects of COVID-19 on the courthouse, Bexar County, and throughout the country. I know that it created a backlog, and for quite a while, you all had virtual trials, and you were working with a virtual jury pool. Where do things stand now? As far as I know, it's been a process of trying to catch up because of what that pandemic caused. Where do things stand now with Bexar County?
It was a difficult process, right? I was the unfortunate person to have to make those decisions as a when to stop in-person jury trials, when to stop in-person hearings. Pre-COVID, March of 2020, our numbers were really great in Bexar County. On the felony district court side, we had 6,500 pending felony cases. Now, there are 10 criminal district court judges, which means we had over 650 as an average, 650 cases per court. These are felony cases, so a lot of them had to be tried. And when they're tried, sometimes it takes a long time to try those cases. As we mentioned, I'm in a murder case now. That case is over a week to try. So it's difficult to get these things processed. When COVID occurred, we ended up having at some point, at the height of COVID, 6,800 pending cases. So we went up from 6,800 to close to 10,000 cases. So we had a 10,000 case backlog at some point. We started in-person jury trials. I knew that it would take about a year to get back to our previous numbers, and we did. We were pumping out these cases as quick as we could. That put a lot of pressure on the district attorney's office and on defense attorneys. Subsequent to that, it's been probably about 10 months since that year passed. We now have about 4,200 felony cases pending. That is an all-time low. We have never had that low case numbers in Bexar County as it relates to felony charges. The issue is we pretty much got rid of all the cases that we could try. The harder cases to get rid of are the ones where somebody is looking at a significant amount of time. So think of somebody charged with a continuous sex abuse of a child, minimum 25 to 99 with no opportunity for parole. Think of a murder charge. Think of the more serious kind of cases. Those cases, because they're more difficult to plea bargain, right? Oftentimes, the state will say, we'll offer you 35 years. A defendant will say, well, there's not a whole lot of risk here. If I'm going to spend most of my life in prison, I might as well just, take the chance and have a jury trial. And so those are harder to try. Those do tend to take longer to process through the system. So our jail is not full, right? We don't have a jail population issue. We really have an issue related to jail staffing. And that's a different conversation that we could have. But related to jail population, we have a huge percentage of folks in custody that are charged with these more violent crimes.
Is the staffing problem, is it just a challenge finding enough people to do it? Is it a workforce shortage? Or
I think it's a combination of things, and I think the DA's office has the same issue, right? You don't have enough folks at work. It's tough for people that want to work within the system nowadays. They get in the system because of that staffing shortage, and they have to work more and work harder, which is bad on morale. So you have bad morale. It's harder to bring people in. So it's just a cyclical thing.
They did increase the pay, though, right?
They did. They increased the pay in different ways. They increased the pay across the board for prosecutors. They increased the pay for public defenders that sort of work equivalent in terms of what they do. But most importantly, they increased overtime pay for people to take care of these indictments. Because we had in Bexar County, at one point when I was doing the research that I did, over 10,000 pending indictments in Bexar County. That's huge. Those are people that have not yet been processed that district courts can see. District courts don't gain jurisdiction over a case until it's gone through the grand jury process. Now, I know that's come down a little bit. I know it's probably about 8,000 now. That's still a significant number, but you can see the effects of paying overtime to those prosecutors that are willing to come in on weekends to put extra time into those processes.
I'm curious, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions out there right now in our county, in our city, about the way the courts work? I think as you're talking about these, as we talk about the backlog after COVID and stuff, I mean, one thing I hear a lot is a lot of cases are being dismissed and just, or just really easy, just get them out, like work through the backlog. Is that one of them? And can you speak to some other ones as well? I
was going to say that's a very broad question, but as it relates to the courts, one of the things that we talk about, so let's focus on the issue that related to case dismissals and case dispositions. So from the perspective of a judge, anytime you hear that a judge accepts a case or accepts a plea bargain, people have a tendency to believe that that means that that judge agrees with what the ultimate sentence was. And that's not the case. That's never possible, right? What a judge does in reviewing these cases is making sure that the constitutional provisions have been followed. On the criminal law, we deal with certain amendments, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, 14th Amendments. And we want to make sure that these amendments, does the defendant understand his or her rights? Did the defendant get proper representation, right? Did the defendant give up trial rights knowingly, recognizing what the end effect is going to be? Nobody pressured the defendant, right? All of these things come into play. So if a judge says constitutionally, this is a plea bargain that I'm going to accept, it means all the proper things have been followed. It's been a fair process. Judges don't have an idea, as I mentioned before, they don't understand the ins and outs of cases. They don't recognize, and it's impossible for them to recognize how strong cases are, because they don't have an opportunity to see a case until it comes up to trial. Now, as it relates to the dispositions that go into plea bargains, oftentimes somebody has a lot of charges pending. Let's say, and I'll just give you a quick example, somebody is accused of robbery. Let's say that they grab a piece of candy at H-E-B, they're walking out, somebody tries to stop them, they push them aside, now they're charged with robbery. They're going out to a car, the car that they have is stolen, so they got a stolen vehicle. Police officer gives chase, they run, now they're charged with evading arrest. Police officer gets them, they resist, now they're charged with resisting arrest. Upon that resisting arrest, then maybe they'll spit on a police officer during that arrest. Now they're charged with a third-degree harassment of a public servant. So you have a lot of charges pending in this one case. Think about having a jury trial and the taxpayer dollars, because we always want to be mindful of the coffers. And so think about having a jury trial in two separate courts. You got felony charges there and you have misdemeanor charges, different types of charges. Every one of those would be a trial. When there's a plea bargain, what the DA will do is they'll say, we'll take the more serious one or two cases, and the others will be things for the judge to consider if it's an open plea bargain. So on a robbery charge, typically let's say the standard plea bargain with this person's history and the aggravated factors in this case would be X, but because they did all these other things, it's going to be higher. So sentences do reflect all of those charges that come into the system, but the way it's reported is you got 3 or 4 dismissals. That looks bad when you look at it that way. Okay. But they're not really dismissals. They're more, rather than try these cases, we're going to take them into consideration and make sure that the sentence is appropriate when all these other kind of cases are looked at. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Judge, in 2021, the county launched a managed assigned counsel system for indigent defendants. Can you talk a little bit about how this system works? I mean, you played a huge role in putting that together.
And is it working well? How's it going?
That's a very good question. I applied through the state to get a grant. We got an $8 million grant to start the Manage Assign Counsel program. Mm-hmm. The initial proposal that I wrote and the positions that we got 12 positions that were going to be paid for by the state. Think of situations like this. Think of the year prior, we had 4,900 individuals that were arrested that had immigration holds. Mm. The law says that anybody charged with a criminal case that has an immigration type case pending has to understand immigration consequences prior to them being able to enter their plea. So as a result of that, cases were being reset because we had put upon criminal defense attorneys, you need to go out and consult with an immigration lawyer as to how this person's immigration rights will be affected. Mm-hmm. With the Manage Assign Counsel now, we have an immigration attorney that has the ability to work for every court-appointed attorney within the county. He works for the MAC. That saves a lot of taxpayer dollars because those letters were $300 to $400 each. Sure. That saves a lot of taxpayer dollars. It frees up the system to where we no longer have to wait for immigration consultations to take place by these individuals, and we make sure that everybody's constitutional rights are followed. Another important thing is we have case managers that work within the mental health section of the MAC. Mm-hmm. So I started, and we just got approved by the governor's office to be a specialty court. I run the felony mental health specialty court, and the funding was not there for a lot of years. So we know how difficult this is, right? We know that if somebody doesn't have mental health care, somebody who's bipolar, clinically depressed, schizoaffective disorders, these individuals are going to commit crimes if they don't get their medication. Mm-hmm. And so we do have we have actually 2 social workers within the Manage Assign Counsel program that look at the underlying causes of crime. When you think of a holistic public defense, you think, right, how do you stop crime? Right? And we know that crime comes from individuals that fall within a certain category. People that are young, not educated, don't have health insurance, don't have family support or community support. When I say not educated, I mean no high school education, mm-hmm. right? Folks that typically are minority, something like 71% are men now. So we see more females coming into the fold. More and more of them are getting arrested. So we're getting individuals that are looking at the underlying causes of crime. If they need health care, if they need housing, if they need medication, if they need food stamps, if they need transportation because it takes them a while using the bus system, then these social workers are here to help them solve those particular issues. Mm-hmm. When I first came in as a judge in 2008, I got elected. We had one mental health care facility called MyOff. They had 30 beds for men, 30 beds for women. Mm-hmm. They were always full. Think about the backlogs that I'm talking about, 6,500 cases. Now, today, 15, 16 years later, the city and the county have a huge network of areas that we can send folks with mental health diagnosis. All sorts of inpatient programs, outpatient programs. We're partnering with private organizations to make sure that these facilities are available. So you can really see a difference happening within the community.
Before we wrap things up, I want to ask you, looking at a year ahead, 2 years ahead, what are the major things that you'd like to see the Public Safety Action Plan accomplish in the short term?
In the short term, I'm really happy to see the collaboration between the DA's office and the chief of police in San Antonio. That's important. What I told the group at our last meeting before we came up with our plan, I have never seen anywhere in Texas where county officials and city public officials come together and set up a series of meetings to discuss these kind of issues. Mm-hmm. The bureaucracy is so big. Mm-hmm. And what tends to happen, and I've seen it happen throughout the course of my career, folks tend to really look inward. Mm-hmm. And in looking inward, they don't really have an understanding as to how those misconnections sometimes occur. And so to take a step back and to see these organizations work together to make these things happen is fantastic. I was very clear in my conversations with them that if victims of crime, we always got to be cognizant that there are people out there that suffer as a result of crime, that those individuals can't feel confident knowing that their law enforcement public officials are bickering. And so to put that out there in the media is kind of a negative thing. Mm-hmm. We live in a 24-hour media cycle, and so people have a real tendency to have a lot of fear. The reality of it is, even in a felony district court like mine, right, I handle the most heinous of crimes. And that type of a court, over 90% of people that get arrested are for nonviolent offenses. Mm-hmm. So I think the most important thing to see is that we continue to look forward and trying to improve the system. the system is made up of people, right? All of us wear rose-shaded glasses. All of us have our own perceptions. If you ask 20 different people, define to me what justice means in this case, you're going to get a different response. Sure. And so because the system is made up of people, there's always going to be an opportunity to improve. Things like improving the computer system. I mean, it was interesting to me that we're in court, we're about to start a trial, case has been pending a year and a half, and the DA's office comes in and says, we can't try this thing today because I just received 40 videos from the police that are important for this particular case. And you ask why? Well, the system between the evidence sharing process of the police, city, and the county DA's office was not compatible. Mm-hmm. So when you solve issues like
on a current case,
we just fixed it.
Okay.
But that was going on for years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're talking about like, how can we fix this? Well, this process
and it's not that the police officers and detectives were not putting it in the system.
That's correct.
They were doing their job.
They were doing their job.
It went somewhere in the cloud.
That's exactly right. And we just realized how to fix that. Mm. So it's these kind of conversations.
What did it take to fix that?
Well, it took this process. It took the mayor giving us a call. The mayor called me up initially and said, Ron, we want to have this collaboration, mm-hmm. and we want to get together and talk about these things. And Judge Sakai jumped on that as well. So it took this process. Generally speaking, those of us in the justice system get frustrated because we're thinking nobody's really paying attention.
Right.
Historically, counties across the state, this is another interesting fact. The state of Texas funds indigent defense, right? States generally mm-hmm. fund indigent defense. As a state, we spend less than half of what the average is of all the other states combined. Mm. So that just tells you the importance that the state and the counties have put into the justice system. So those of us that work within the system love these opportunities to bring out and highlight and make these changes happen. Mm-hmm. And so this is an unfortunate opportunity, but we have to take advantage of these situations in terms of helping the public understand.
Is the funding going to be there for everything you want to get done?
Obviously not, but any more funding is always appreciated.
Yeah. Much, if you got, what's your wish list? I mean, how much would it cost?
It wouldn't cost as much as people think. Mm-hmm. We fight with the county for instance, right? We tried to get, we started an impact court to help us with these mm-hmm. unindicted cases, to help shepherd them through faster, mm-hmm. to help the DA's office move them in. That entire cost is probably about $100,000. It was very difficult to get it from the county. We never got it from the county.
Wow.
I had to go to the state to get a grant, which is fine. But at some point, the state's not going to grant fund mm-hmm. that. So we fight over pennies sometimes, just mm-hmm. dollars. And Bexar County does have a reputation. I don't want to disparage anybody in office. I'm very happy to work with the folks that I work with, but we do have a reputation for underfunding the justice system. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what you see today is a result of that.
Yeah. And you would think Judge Sakai is helping on that though, right? I mean, I would think he's helping on that, helping them see and understand it as well.
It's wonderful to have a former district judge in that position. Mm-hmm. So, yes.
Judge Rangel, thank you so much for taking time out and being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And for everyone listening in, I hope you're doing well. We're going to be back again next week. Take care.